I would like to welcome you to this very important virtual conference. It is indeed, I think, a very important opportunity to engage with policy makers, thought leaders, among other experts on this platform with the aim of spotlighting and finding the way forward for the teeming youth population in Africa. My name is Ayuba Ilya, and I'm honored to moderate the very first edition of the Africa Youth Conversation. Now, at the end of this webinar, just like the host has said, we hope to provide ideas that will help in harnessing the Africa Youth Advantage. Now, there are two basic segments to today's virtual session, and we will be getting a keynote presentation from Professor Pielo Lumumba, whom we are waiting for him to join us any moment from now. And then, of course, there will be a question and answer segment where other speakers will also be sharing their thoughts with us. So it means that you are free to drop questions as the conference continues. You are free to drop questions and on issues that you think you would like to know more about, and the speakers will be responding to them at the appropriate time. You do that by raising up your hand, and then you'll be allowed to also bring up your questions. Now, before the keynote speaker join us, just by way of laying a background to this conversation, I would like to just tell a little story that is not very unpopular in Nigeria. For us in Nigeria, it's very popular, and I find it very apt that I bring this forward. In March 2014, the Nigerian Immigration Service in Nigeria here embarked on the recruitment drive to employ about 4,000 personnel into the service. Now, it was reported at the time that an estimated 6.5 million people, young people, indicated interest to join the service from across the 36 states of the Federation. And now, of course, as expected, when you have that number of people trooping in for a space, or I would say a job of just about 4,000 people, you are definitely expecting a stampede. And that happened. Some people died in the process, while trying to get enlisted now into the service. Now, you can imagine that at the time, unemployment rate was just 23.9%. Today, in Nigeria, unemployment is 33%. So I'm trying to use this angle, as a way for us to begin to look at the desperation of young people in Africa. More recently, we also heard about the story of a young graduate from the University of Uyo in Yobong, Umoreng, whose body was discovered in a shallow grave somewhere in the States after she was declared missing. She was said to have gone for she was lured by her kidnappers and by her killers on social media to go for a job interview, which was a hoax. And at the end of the day, she was raped and killed. That caused a whole lot of reaction. Now, these are the kind of stories that we have in this part of the world, and I believe that it's also a common story in other parts of Africa. It shows the desperation and danger that African leaders, have in their hands to deal with. Now, youth in Africa constitute about 60% of the African population, with 19 out of the top 20 youngest countries in the world from Africa. What does that tell you? Africa is the youngest continent in the world. Now, this large number of young people that we are having is expected to triple by the year 2050. Goes to say that when you have a large number of youths that are, I would say, restless, and on the other hand, you have unemployment, you have poverty, you have poor infrastructure, then some people, have argued that that's a disaster in the waiting. And so when you have that kind of a situation, you begin to think, what are African leaders doing, to engage young people? Because it's really a big problem. And these are the issues that we are hoping that our keynote speaker will be able to delve in, as we go on along the line. Now, before he joins us, I would like for us to just, throw in and share our expectations, in the light of the background I have just laid, the expectations on this conference today, so that we can just get going while we wait for our keynote speaker. So the floor is open. You can just chip in, make your own contribution as we await our keynote speaker.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here today. And I'm so excited to engage with everyone today. So I think some of the problems to youth participation is economic participation, and how not only the government, but also the private sector can really engage the youth and get them involved in the process from start to finish. Because I feel like a lot of the time the youth are left behind. The systems for recruiting the youth or the systems for encouraging the youth is not very coordinated between both the government and the public sector. So the education is a big component of it. There's really poor education in Africa. And when you're looking at it from a global perspective, the level of education that our peers are receiving overseas far outweighs our education. And that also impacts how we can then participate globally, not only for ourselves, but also for the betterment of Africa as a region. Second, entrepreneurial mindset is so important. I think even from the most basic skills, from the most basic education from primary up until secondary, it's so important for there to be entrepreneurial mindset development. And when I talk about entrepreneurial mindset development, I'm not talking about the fact that now everyone must go start a business, because I feel like that's been kind of the ideas that have been proposed, the idea that if we're all getting entrepreneurial mindset development, then we're all going to start businesses. But this is not very feasible, because if you look at it, if we're all having businesses, who's going to buy from who? So entrepreneurial mindset is not only about starting businesses, it's also about entrepreneurship. So how can we as the youth use these entrepreneurial mindset activities and implement them in jobs where we will be working? That's what I think is really most important for the youth at this stage. And just engagement, conversations like this are so important, also including the youth such as myself, also directed at the policymakers. So those are my thoughts.
So I will talk in general, but I will, according to my experience of growing up in Sudan, till I become like 22, and I moved to South Africa for the sake of studying. And I'm still here in South Africa, finishing up my PhD. So we know that Africa is the youngest continent in the world on this planet Earth, but unfortunately we are not taking advantage of those young people. According to my own opinion, I personally know the reason and what's happening in my country. Honestly, there are problems that distract those young people to do not think carefully and know exactly what they need to do for themselves to improve their lives, and then also contribute in the whole country development and also our continent development. In my country, Sudan is one of the most poor countries in the world and in Africa. This thing made everyone who is like a little bit like having education or good enough in something to immigrate and travel outside the country. Most of them, they go to Europe and Middle East as well. So if you go to the Khartoum airports, you find daily educated people are leaving the country. And then the rest of the people there in my country, you find 6 or 7 families depend on one person who is just working, let's say in UK. For that person himself cannot be creative in their whatever they're doing. So now no one is having a clear mind. I know the root of this problem because I've been like a child who was growing up in a village. So they are like some got a chance to do education and to study. Some do not because of the like kids labor. So you find like 12 years of age girl that working in how cleaning housing and this thing, and some others they go after animals and farming. Unfortunately, I wish if those ones they get the chance to grow in whatever they do. So work isn't bad, but those ones they end up like frustrated. They don't contribute anything, not to themselves, not to the country. The other thing, one of the problems in my country as well is racism. I've seen this in the schools. I've seen this growing up by my eyes, like when kids fight there. Like I don't see anyone who like make an action, stop these things. So most of us do grow up with a broken heart, the bullying in the schools, and this is all over the country, tribalism as well. So when it gets to the point that you go and you apply for a job, you will end up like rejected. Why? Because you're not from the tribe of the minister or something like that. So those two things, like leaders in my country and all over Africa, I know this problem is also going on there. Even in South Africa, I've seen it by my eyes. Like, yeah, most of the students are like the South African Black students do not continue. For example, the one in masters do not go for PhD. Like few of them, they go for that, even if there is fund for them, particularly for those South African, the Black ones by name like this. No one even apply. You see. So the problem is really big and it's rooted there. So if we solve those problems like kid labor and racism and tribalism, as well as early marriage. Imagine like 12 years of age in my country, get married. So what use are you talking about? Yeah, they're young there, but they don't have a chance to do anything.
Thank you very much. An important question and amazing discussion from our panelists going forward. We would love to explore this question to understand. Let's create a background. I want to paint a scenario where you need to understand we have two sets of African youths in Africa. Okay, so there are colonial independence or independence youth, and there are post-independence youth. So let me put it this way. You have colonial independent African youth, and then you have post-independence African youth. Let me expatiate. Let me give more color to it. Now, we have our leaders, most of them come from the colonial independent African youth. And they have a different expectation, they have different needs. And then you have post-independence, where I belong, African youth. We also have different expectations and different needs. So most times we begin to look at these two, it clashes. Okay, so the needs of these people not actually the need of these other people. So you find out that these other people will be expecting you to do the same thing as much as they had seen it or they perceive it to be. So it's always good for us to create a scenario, this scenario, to understand, so that anyone at the sound of our voice that is in this section will understand the background and understand when we start asking for certain things, why we are asking for them. Now, having said that, the practical need of African youth, of post-independence African youth, the colonial independent African youth had a desire to take away power from the colonial masters. So their desire, their need was to create nationalistic movements. They wanted to be heard. They wanted to create government. They wanted to take away government, controlling economic power out of the colonial masters. So that was the idea. That was their push. That was their desire. That's what they needed. And then they joined school So the idea of go to school, get a good grade so that you can secure a good job, and then grow from the ranks. That had the push. That's the urge. But that was the urge. Now you are now talking to independence, post-independence African youth. What are our desires? Two things that I have discovered as a global young leader. Two things that I have discovered interacting with young people across the globe. They want to have the right to decide their future. African youth wants to have the right to decide their future. That is one. Two, they want to have access to that future. So one is having the right to decide the kind of future they need. And the second is having access to that future. You see, these two needs, having right to decide the future and having access to that future. These two needs, when they are not provided, they can lead to an army of massive destruction when they are not provided. That is why you see agitations here and there. You see young people talk about we are not included, we are excluded, and all that. Now,
so you are talking about a right to decide for their future and also a right to access it.
yes.
What's the future? What kind of future does the average African youth looks for? What's he looking forward to?
Financial freedom. An African youth needs financial freedom, financial and economic freedom. They want social mobility. That is opportunity to access growth, opportunity to experience growth, notwithstanding background. So an average African youth don't want to be kept because I've been born in because you cannot negotiate where you are born to. I can't negotiate. You couldn't have negotiated where you were born. That is how you saw it. But then you are doing certain things to improve your lot. Those things should propel you to another level. So an African youth wants to grow, wants to be given an opportunity to grow, to experience a life better than where they have found themselves. Okay? An African youth wants youth inclusiveness in governance, okay, in deciding their future, in discussing their future. And that is why I'm happy that this type of section and this type of discussions are beginning to build up. And a whole lot of other movements that have been launched to support young people. Okay, so an African youth wants to ensure that in leadership, that they are part of governance.
I think one of the major things that we need is structured information. I think, and that starts from our schools, so from the primary school to the university level, in terms of educating people on going to the university, what I'm going to study, and the career guidance. We used to have them in the universities, which at the moment is not even happening anymore. So I think the major problem we have is the information. I mean, Faith is talking about having freedom to decide what they want to do. The truth of the matter is we are more confused than before. So we don't know what to do. So if you give us the platform to tell us what we have to do, we don't know what we want to do. So people go to university, like I gave you an example in the primary school, where people say, I'm studying electronics because my mom told me to study electronics. People study courses because their friends are studying it. Now, the counseling from the primary school level, that you are going to school, you are studying visual art, this is your future, this is what's going to happen. You need somebody who with industry experience, a leader, to lead this young generation. Say, look, you are studying A, B, C, D. If you study this in the future, this is what you're going to be doing. I will have to be honest with you. When we were selecting schools in the primary school, I had a cousin who chose C and J for me, carpentry and joining. I can imagine me doing carpentry and joining. It's not in my passion, in my wildest dream, I won't do it. But it's because I was just there. People were just selecting information. But if I had somebody sitting down, I was lucky because the gentleman who pushed me to select electronics for me was an industry player. He was very good in electronics engineering. So he was able to tell me that, oh, this is the course you have to go in and study. So what the Ghanaian education, Ghanaian youth needs, it's not about give me the freedom, because the freedom, you need to guide them to get to the point where they can decide what they want. Teach us how to fish. Simple. I mean, just guide us the way. When we get to our age where we think we can make decisions for ourselves, we know what to choose, where to choose from.
There have been some very useful thoughts and thought processes in terms of how, just think about what the youth need. I would say, just kind of echoing some of the earlier statements, inclusion, just to wrap up, what Faith was saying, basically, there's a lack of inclusion. I think also following on from Ezra's point, protective legislation, particularly around like child marriage and the age of consent, and also thinking about minimum wage, because obviously the people that are entering into the workforce are likely to be people with little experience, and they're going to be younger people who are earning minimum wage. If there isn't a minimum wage that actually represents a living wage, it's incredibly problematic, because it means that the user, they're going to take a lot longer to become independent. But I think one of the key things for me is vision. I think that leaders need to actually operate with vision and thinking about a vision for the future, because there's a lot of short-sighted just policies and practices that are currently enacted, and that there's very little thought to what the future is actually going to look like 15, 20 years down the line. The future isn't with us, most of us who are even on this panel, is actually with our children and our children's children. So there isn't a lot that's being done to think about the environment, creating useful structures and systems that the youth will actually benefit from, because if we're thinking about sustainability and sustainability of industries, we need to be thinking, 30, 40 years down the line and even further. It can't just be about what happens tomorrow and the day after. So I think vision is the key thing. The first thing, thinking about a vision that will actually help the youth, 20, 30 years down the line, and also thinking about how we include them in the dialogue and in the conversation. Not to say that we have to effectively, do as the young people are saying in terms of their ideas and their thoughts, but taking them into consideration, because ultimately a lot of the policies that are actually enacted, they're the ones that are going to be affected, mostly by them. They're the ones that have to live with the future ramifications of what the politicians and leaders are deciding now. So, that's for me the three key things. But I think vision, a future focused vision, is one of the most important things we could actually think about for them.